Right in a blood Gemara, we're Shavuos Daf Yud Ches. We are towards the bottom of the page, about 10 lines from the bottom of the page. We were discussing regarding a nida, where a person can be over an aver shaygig, and in fact it could be two shaygigim. And one of them is that if he thought we were talking about, if he thought if it wasn't the time of her period, then actually it's an onus if it turned out to be that she became a nida. So generally, we're talking about it's samach levesta, it's the time of a period, and he's a Talmud Chacham, should have known better. But he thought that he's able to remove himself right before she becomes a nida, but it didn't happen. So it's a shaygig. And the second part of it is now that he found out that she's a nida, how he reacted. If he immediately his impulse was to remove himself, that in itself is a continuation of what he started, and therefore there's another aveda. And we're talking about a case where he's a Talmud Chacham Bezu, v'lo Talmud Chacham Bezu. He didn't know this particular din that he thought that the right thing to do is stop right away and leave. But what he should have done is he should have waited till his ava becomes limp, and then he should exit. So because we just discussed the idea that the ava becomes limp, then he exits, and it sounds like because then you're no longer considered as if you're being boiled, as if you're having any relations, and therefore it's permitted. So based on that, the Rabbi comes up with a new halach that if somebody had an illicit relationship, and the relationship was with a member that was limp, he's not over the Avera because we see here that it's not considered as if you're having relations. That's what we just said. That's Rabba's view, and we'll see Abaya argues. Says the Gemara, Omar Rabba, about 10 lines to the bottom of the page, and if you Ches Amar Aleph, Rabba comes along and says, Zoyse Med is based on what we just said right now, that you have to wait until your Ava becomes limp. You found that your wife was a nida in middle of your relations, and you wait till your Ava is limp, and why is that any better? It must be because you're no longer considered having relations. So based on that, Rabba wants to come along and says, Zoyse Medes, or some say, Rabba says, Zoyse Medes, from here we learn out, Hamishamish Mace Ba'arayis, an illicit affair, but the Ava was limp, potter. It's not as if you had a relation. I'll prove to you. But you can tell me that even if it's limp, the fact is you're having relations, then my time potter. Then why over here would you be potter? You tell me about the nida, wait till the Ava becomes limp, and then exit. What does it help the Ava becomes limp? You're still continuing the relation. Why are you potter? Navas Mishum the Onusu. Sigmara says back, maybe because you have no breda. What should you do? You're already having relations, you're stuck, suddenly you found out she's a nida, you have no breda, you have to leave. But the point is, Onusu Kipirish Miyanami Nifted Onusu. Then what's the difference if you're gonna tell me that it's like this. If you take exactly Punish Manus, and if you're going to tell me that even when your Ava is limp, you're still considered as having relations. So what's the point of waiting till the Ava becomes limp? Might have come in it. Either one you're doing an Aveda. And forget. You would think in logic you should leave straight away. Why prolong the Isa? Is that it says Rabbi, the vote is not honest. The reason why you wait till the Ava is limp is because it's not considered you're having relations at all, and that's why Hamashamish Baroyas. If somebody's Hamashamish makes Baroyas, if your Ava is limp and you're illicit relations, it's not an Aveda because it's not like you had relations. That's Rabbi's Chiddush. That's why he makes a difference between if you leave straight away or you wait until your Ava is a mess. Comes along Abai says, Vezok, Abai said to Rabbi or to Rabbi, I can argue, I can tell you, Hamashamish makes Baroyas Chayv. If you have an illicit affair and your Ava is limp, maybe you are chayiv. You're chayiv. Nice. So what's the over here? The hocha my time of potter. So why over here you potter? Why are you potter? From the onusu. Let's go back to what we thought originally. You have no breda. You have to. You have to leave. I asked me a question. So what might have come in to leave straight away? I've heard the keep potters miyad and my chayiv. If it makes no difference whether the Ava is chai or the Ava is mess, either way you commit an Aveda. So why? And here we say we're allowed to exit because it's an oinus. So why are we telling you to wait? Just go leave straight away. I'll tell you why. Try to reduce, even though it's an Aveda, it's sort of a lesser Aveda. It's less hana, and therefore. Therefore, we say, wait till your Ava is limp. But there's still something happening there. But remember, you have no braid over there. It's an oinus. But even an oinus, let's try to mitigate the isser, mitigate the hana. So therefore, even if you're having illicit relations with an Ava mace, You're still chayiv. That's what Abaye says. Because that's the Yisrael Nida is having enough. So if you can minimize it, it shows that you. I guess it shows that you're bothered by it. You do your charot or whatever. Yeah. Oh, Malay, we're bound to pay you Chesed Aleph, and we're basically saying now that if the Rava came up with a chiddush that if you're having illicit relations with an Ava, that's mess, you're not chayiv. Because we just said before, if somebody's having relations with a niddah and he finds out he didn't know at the time, she wasn't a niddah, became a niddah in the middle, we tell you to exit when? After the Avid is maced. That proves that then it's no longer considered as if you're having relations with a niddah. That's what we're telling you to wait. So the same thing, if you're mishamish with aroyis, with an Avid mess, you're not chayiv. Abai says next that even if Ava mess, you're chayiv. And the reason why we tell you to leave it because it's an oinus you have no bredi. Bavas. Do the lesser Aveda. That's all. If you're right, you're telling me that there's two ways of going out. They're both a problem. But the two ways of going out, one is the short way, which is leave straight away. One is the long way, take your time. Now, before we learn the base of English, if you found out that you were tummy, you touched the shedders or something, you found out that you were tummy, well, you were the base of English, and you have two routes, the short way and the long way. We tell you must go out the short way. Because if you go out the long way, then you are chayiv. So here you have the same thing, but the reverse. Here the short way is leave straight away. Here, that's a problem. The long way is the better way, right? Because it takes longer. So why does the Mishnah make a distinction between two routes, two options? And even though it's coming both ways, but at least this is a lesser sin, take the shortcut. So here also, the Mishnah should have made a difference here between arucha and tzara. But in this case, the arucha is the one that we recommend. Take your time. Take your time and wait till your Eva becomes limp. Says in the Mishnah we only learned by Mikdash the difference between the two paths, the two ways, and they're both no good, but you have no breda, so we tell you take the tzara. So over here it says the same thing. They're both no good, but take the arucha. So he answers back. You know why we don't say that? Amalei Abai said to him, "Should like domi arucha the hocha tzara the hasan." Our aruch over here is the right way, which is exactly like by Tumah Liktzar. The shortcut is the best way. Here, the best way is take your time. Take your time, pause, wait. And Baruch, the Hazan, the Hacha, because it's different, the mission, it's not the same thing. So the mission decided not to put it in. Otherwise, it'd be confusing. You would think that over here also you should leave Dafka straight away. Just like by the base of Midrash, the Tzara is the right path. You would think that by Nida also the Tzara, in other words, exiting straight away be the right path or ending it straight away. So therefore, the mission didn't put it in. Masker the son of said, I don't understand Abaya. Me Abaya honest. So what do you tell me now? Abaya holds that if once you're having relations and then turned out to be that she's a nida, then the din is that you have to leave. And really you're chayiv whichever way you do it. Even an Aver mess you're chayiv, but you're not honest. Yeah, that's the only reason why we over here we treat you like an honest, and therefore we're saying you mitigate the hana that you're having. The problem is, Abaye said before that there are two korbanos chatois involved. He said the two korbanos chatois involved. Why are two korbanos? No, and we said we're talking about a Talmid Chacham who knows Alma. Now, if you're an onus, it could only be an onus if it happened shaloi b'shaz vesta. In other words, if you knew that there was her period, but you thought to have a chachma, even if you're a Talmid Chacham, you thought you have a chachma, you know how to get around it. You could no longer say I'm an honest. Who has to get started? You knew that your wife was expecting. We said before, when are you considered honest? You had no idea you had no idea it was a time of a period. Yes, like Vesta. So therefore, you're an honest. So if Abaye says you're an honest, it's talking about Shleibashas Vesta. So how come Abaye said before, and that's how he's going to start the Mishnah. So how come Abaye said before that two korbanos chatois involved, one for the entrance and one for the exit? The exit was you thought that spontaneously impulsively you removed yourself, which is wrong. So it was a shaygig. But entering is an inus. It's like b'shas vesta. So Abaye must be talking about that it is b'shas vesta. If it's b'shas vesta, even the leaving you can't really call it an inus. Says Gemara, "Mi Abaye honest or alma b'shas can be talking about Abaye don't mechayv shtayim alma b'samach vesta skin, and he definitely learned the Mishnah about samach vesta. So therefore, and therefore he says and why you're no longer an inus. Then you're amazed. So we said we're talking about Talmid Chacham. He thought that he thought he can whatever circumnavigate the problem. Says you're right. This thing Abaye's comment about two korbanos chatois was nothing to do with our Mishnah. It's a general din. He's saying it's possible to have two chatois, and the chiddush of Abaye is there It's as if in order to have two chatois, you have to have a yediyah in between. So we said before, you're a shegig, you thought you can get around this and that, and then you found out, oh, she became a nida, and then you were Polish, but you weren't a Talmud Chacham regarding the din of Prisha, and you thought that you have to leave straight away, so that you're a shegig as well. And the chiddush is that yediyah in between is considered a yediyah, and it's two kabbalas. Nothing to do with our Mishnah. Just stop. So therefore, but in our Mishnah, he learned that our Mishnah is talking about a case of an oinus. And that's why if you're exiting, you're an oinus, and we want you to do the lesser sin. So right, eat mobil by Rabbi Yonason ben Yossi ben Lakunya asked Rab Shimon ben Yossi ben Lakunya. In other words, it seems like two brothers. As Hodel the boil nida menayin. Where do you know that you're not allowed to be boiling nida? Min hatayda. Shakav kola. He took a piece of wood, possibly he threw it at him. It must be brothers. A teacher would do that to a student. What a nadisha question. As Hodel the boil nida. Are you asking me where you're not allowed to? It said Tayda isha benida tumasa leisikru. Now interesting because we had a thesis. Actually, we're gonna have a Gemara. We had a thesis in Barbasa. Where Tosa says that Rabbanan leibaki bekroi, Amoroi leibaki bekroi. That the Chacham didn't know psukim in the Chumash. So what? No, that's another Gemara. That's Mavacham. That's Professor Abtanchum, which is even a bigger pella because Abtanchum is one of what mentioned the Chumash according to many, which the whole sefer is built on Chumash. So that's why they all try to come up with different shots in there. And yet he got angry on his brother. He wanted the best out of his brother. He cared for him. It's when you don't care, your brother says a stupid thing, that's a problem. Yeah, you care for him, he threw a piece of wood at him. It says a positive fetish. So he said, actually, you misunderstood my question. My question is, how do you know that you're not allowed to exit straight away? The Omer Allah, and she says to him, it may say at the time when you started, she was tired. Then she said, I'm Tameh, the Lonifrish, Miyad, you how you know that? And he didn't answer him. Or maybe the Gemara later on explains what he really meant. Chizkiah said, it says in Pasuk, if a man has relations with his wife when she's a nida, he's tummy for 7 days and so on and so forth. And it says there, the nida remains with him, as if to say it should linger olav with him. What do you mean should linger? He's also to be with a nida, and yet he should remain with him olav. Sometimes continue. What do you mean something continue? When you found out that, in middle, that you became a nida, don't jump out. Pause. That's Pashup Shot. But now with Dash and Tina does love is that he should continue with the nida on him. When it comes to Polish. Wait till the Aver is mess. So Gemara says, no, ask Asay. Here we find out that you're over an Asay. But you're by exiting or the loises seminal and how you get a loises Papa. Now, why we're talking about a loisa is because we're saying now we have a carbon chatas. Why? As Shem explained. In order to bring a carbon, you need to have a lav. You don't bring a carbon asay. If you didn't bring a carbon pesach, you don't bring a carbon. Even though there's nisa karas thing. If you didn't mala, you don't bring a carbon. So there must be a loisa. Where's the loisa for being polish miyad? Papa, it says the pasuk loisikov. Right? It says Aisha benida tomasha loisikov. Loisikov also means loisikov nami means loitifers. We find loisikov means don't separate. What do you mean loisikov? Don't get closer to yourself. We're teaching loisikov doesn't mean only don't get closer to somebody else. Don't withdraw, because when you withdraw, you're getting closer to yourself. And that's being kodesh. It's allowed. The bad people tell the Navi, don't get, get closer to yourself and don't get close to us, because we will metamah you. It means like means metamah you. We have the Nishayim have a problem is because we had Mefeshing Morabakas that for a carbon you don't need a loisasa. You don't need a lava. You don't need a hazhara. For a carbon, only for malchus, for punishment, you need a hazhara. By carbon, you don't need a hazhara. So why over here you need a hazhara? So they try to answer the ways. So we learned. Now we're talking about a nida, so we're going to digress again. It said, here we learn now that a woman a husband should separate from his wife around their period. How long? Being machlekes is showing exactly what oina is. If oina means the whole time or just around the time, does it mean 12 hours? No, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It means from 4 in the afternoon yesterday. Yeah, but with Patkins oina is one time. But what does it mean? If If it's if let's say she has a vested kavua on a particular day, but the hours are all over the place. It could be first thing in the morning, afternoon, late night. Then we do the night before as well. Otherwise, me just on Oina 12-hour period. Big machlek is a shayna. This is Mahatoida and Rabban. Because the lashon the Gemara is Mikan Azhara. Sounds clearly Mahatoida. In most poskim hold that's only the Rabban, and therefore with Mekel, and therefore technically you're allowed to have relations with your wife, kissing and all that. You're allowed to because it's only the Rabban. So we're lenient. It's only tashmish you're not allowed to have, even though all the Shulchan Aruch says you should one should be machmer. But it's much lighter because it's the Rabban. What's the machlekes? Because another din that says if a guy is going on a trip, he has a mitzvah to have relations with his wife. Now, if it's mahatoida, then it's an oina. Even if it's some oina, how can you go have relations? So those are shayim will hold that being tam, and others hold that it's mahatoida. They learn that relations doesn't mean tashmish. It means embracing. Yeah, exactly. But even chibuk in a shikah, more than just hachak. Even chibuk in a shikah and all that is permitted. Those who hold that it's midrabanan say taki that the Rabbanan removed the isur of anticipating by the oina when you're going out because it's a mitzvah to mekayim oina. Talking about that, if you don't separate from her, I feel having lebonim kibnei Aaron. Even if you have wonderful children, mason they will die. The Chsiv says, it says the pasuk you should warn Eden about becoming tamei, and then it says, and what tumah we talking about? The next, it says hadova benidasa talks about a nida, and and then afterwards it says achrei mois. Pretty strong, harsh words. What are the kids in the shoulder? What do they do?
None of the Farsi bring this up in the Gemara. They all say because of Nobody said because of this.
They weren't married, so they couldn't have been with them. I remember he said one of the things that says that. Yeah, but
that the body nobody brings
because we're not going to accuse Adam of misbehaving.
Okay, but then what's he saying?
For everybody else. For everybody else. What about the years? But Kroivai Kodesh, Moshe Rabbeinu said they were greater than us.
So, but that's why I'm absolutely bewildered by this.
No, one of the reasons is because they weren't married. In fact, that's one of the forget, you'll be rewarded. If Stephen said you'll have males, if you separate, some of it says Isha Kisazir, and then and says you'll have children. And Shmuel Levi always adds one more thing, that's not bonus chorim. They will have smicha. That's why it's an inyan for one of the reasons that everyone should get smicha before they get married, so that you're giving a reward to your parents. The Chsiv, it says lahavdil ulahiris. It says that you should separate Truma and Tara, and then it says lahiris b'nei Yisrael, and you to pass into the Eden. So they talk about you should drink wine, but the point is we're learning this as well. Anyone who makes havdalah on wine, but motzai Shabbos, haven't bon is charim. So it's unbelievable gula as well for everything else, for eyes and all that. It's also we had an Aritzachim, but also a schus for bonim charim. The Chsiv says lahavdil ben hakodesh ben hachad. Even though technically you're allowed to use chmar medina, other drinks, alternative drinks, best thing is to use wine. See, the husband says there. It says if you're being mavdul ben kodesh achol, in other words, that's havdalah, and then it says lahavdil ben atam ben ator, and for some of it says isha kisazia. And so that you'll have children's chalim. Comes to Shmuel Levi, the bracha of bonim chalim is not some bonim chalim. Bonim ruin l'hira. We're going in order. We're putting all the things together. Is bonim ruin l'hira? Ruin l'hira means that it sounds like they don't actually have to become a bonim. Just they have smicha, so they could become, and that's already a bracha. It says lahavdil l'hira. Otherwise, you say bonim. Shemoidim, it's ruin lahira. Anybody who has relations and make sure that he prepares himself, does the shemaim. Have again bonus chodesh. It says this kadash and the samachlei. Right next to it says isha kisazriya. So again, all of these wonderful brachas happen. Now go back to our Mishnah. Rabbi Lezer says hashedet shenelim emenu. If you touched the shedet and you forgot that you were tamei. Now, in the pasuk it says, by the way, luchol tamei. If a guy touches any tumah and walks the base of mikvah, but it does not apply to every tumah. According to one opinion, it applies only to things that a nozir has to shave his hair for. Only that. If the kohen touches, and walks the base of mikvah, or if somebody walks the base of mikvah while he's tamei, he's chayiv misa. And then we add sheretz is not something that a nozir is megalechel. It's only tamei meis. And sheretz we add because the pasuk is clear luchol sheretz. So even though puzzle l'chol tamei doesn't mean any tumah, it means any tumah according to those tanoim that a nozer shaves for. Says the Gemara. Now in our Mishnah we have a problem because Rabbi Lezer and Akiva seem to be saying the same thing, which is that only if you became tamei, you forgot you were tamei, and you entered the base of Mikdash, you ate a korban, you have the oil of the edit. But if you knew you were tamei, but you forgot that this is a base of Mikdash, but you forgot that this is kachim, it doesn't apply. They both say the same thing, practically the same thing. So I ask, my benayu, they both say that you had to forget that you were tamei. That's the only time that we bring korban over the what's Rabbi Lezer? The difference is sheretz unavela ika benayu. Do you have to know how you became tamei? Do you have to know the source of your tamei? If you know that you're tamei, is that called yedi already? And therefore, if you forgot and you walked to the base of Mikdash, you chayv become or you had to know precisely how do I become tamei. We need add the yada. He should know. He has to know exactly what happened. That's why he says in the Mishnah the Beshedet. But Kiva says like being the yada. Kiva the yada. The itma ba'il Michal knows that he became tamei. Like tzarich, that's enough. It makes no difference because the outcome is the same. So what do you have to know the specifics? The same thing as Ula says. That's the difference. But you have to know the specifics in that. The Ula Rami, we decided to find Ula saying this. Ula asked a question for Rabbi Lezer on Rabbi Lezer. Umeshane answered. He found a contradiction of Rabbi Lezer. What's the story? Do you say Taka Rabbi Lezer? You have to know exactly, precisely what cause of your tumor. But Aminu, we found elsewhere in Gemara Kisvul, Rabbi Lezer, Manavshach. I have to know exactly. I ate something. I don't know what it was. Do I have to know if whether it was the chaylev, treiva, was it a vela? What do I have to know for us? I know that either way I didn't have Ada. So Rabbi Lezer says, "Be'inan ad yedei b'sheretit me b'nevelit me." Do I need to know? V'raminu, we ask, Rabbi Lezer, Manush chaylev ochel chayev, noish ochel chayev, Shabbos chil chayev, kibur chil chayev, each need a ball chayev. In other words, as long as he knows he ate something, he doesn't know what he ate was chaylev, treifa fat, or he ate was noiser. But either one, he didn't have Ada. So Rabbi Lezer said, that's enough. That's called a yediyah, and therefore you got to bring a korban and so on. Or let's say he's not sure if he's Shabbos chil or Yom Kippur chil. He knows he's mechal. He doesn't know what it was. Shabbos or Yom Kippur. Might have committed either one. He has, he didn't have Veda. Or Ishta need the ball chayiv achoyse ball chayiv. Whether he's not sure there's a woman in his bed and he's not sure if it's his wife or his sister. Either way, he didn't have Veda. So Rabbi Lezer in this Baraisa hole doesn't care. As long as you know you're Veda. And by us, and elsewhere he says, oh, you have to know whether it was a sheretz. What's the cause of your tumor entering the base of Mikdash? So what's going on here? Rabbi Shua argues, he says you need to know precisely what the Aved is in order to be considered Yediyah to be Korban Chatas. Hari Oimet says the Pasuk, you have to know what you sinned with. You need to know exactly what the sin was. So you know exactly what the sin was. So it's the Chassid Rabbi Lezer. Here he says you don't have to know the Mishani. He has a special pasuk when it comes to korban chatas. Generally, it says a pasuk ashechata that he sinned vehevi amar rachmana. Chata kosher, as long as you know you sinned, that's enough to bring a korban. When it comes to a chatas kvu, a fixed korban, as long as you know you did a korban. Hocha mechdi over here by tumah, we're talking about when does he say that you need to know what causes tumah is only when it comes to Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because here it says b'chol davar tamei. If he touches anything which is tamei, and then it says. Why is the pasuk spell out all these examples? You just said b'chol tamei. You need to know what the cause of tumah is. That's Rabbi Lezer. No, Rabbi Kiva, according to Rabbi Kiva, good question. He holds you don't have to know what the tumah is. So why is it to spell out the behemoth? It says the boy Heidi the boy lemichte behemoth bechaya. Since you need the first part behemoth chay, we had the Zayin that Rebbe said that says behemoth and says chay. Remember, even Rabbi said that the Rebbe knows how to be taken out of the doilus. He says out of the deep. He knows how to pull out of the deep. What do you call it? Boirus. He's able to figure it out. But how do you know that if you're tummy, and how do you know that you forgot that your tummy walked in the base of Mikdash? How do you know that? Or all the pasuk says of Hashem, you committed a sin and you didn't have it. What sin? What did you do? You were tummy and what? So Rebbe figured out from Behemoth Chai, he says it's extra because every Behemoth Chai are all the same. So therefore he learns that just like over there, it talks about that if you ate a Behemoth Chai, if you go into the base of Mikdash, we learn the same thing over here. So what do you call it? So, but you need it for that part. Once you work that, the Torah bring the rest. The Rebbe could exceed shed it. Give Torah Rabbi Shmuel, and why? Because Rabbi Shmuel once said a famous rule. Torah Rabbi Shmuel has a lot of famous rules. He once said, "Kol Pasha." Anytime you find a Pasha in the Torah, nem levenishnis, repeated for no reason. I don't need that every part of that pasuk should be a chiddush. If there's one din in that pasuk that's a chiddush, it's a chiddush, and then the Torah can bring the rest of the pasuk as well. So Sheretz is brought, by the way, there's no need for it. But Rabbi Lezer, who says that you don't need to know specifically what Averi you did, whether it was chayliv or whether it was noisir, hi ba ma'avid. It says the pasuk ba. It says ashachata ba, like Rabbi Shua said. It says you should know what's v'haydel of ashachata ba, the sin that you did with it. But according to you, what do you do with the word ba? This has to do with misasek. And what is actually misasek? So we have on Shabbos you have this. You have a thing called meleches machshavas. That means Shabbos you have a unique halacha you don't have anywhere else. You need to know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, we had the chagiga. This is the mountains that are built on hairs. Because where does the Torah say meleches machshavas? And yet this is the principle of Shabbos. That's the basis for davar shei miskaven if it's unintentional. Meleches machshavas. You need to have intention. The favorite of Chaim Brisker, whether it has to have, it means kavana or rotzen, and then you have so that's the misasik, and then you have misasik. Misasik means you had no idea what you were doing. So there's a big machlek in the shaynim. So what's meleches machshavas and what's misasik adding? So Rashi says different gesoys in Rashi, but Rashi says if you wanted to cut one cabbage and you ended up cutting another cabbage, that's a problem meleches machshavas. Your machshav wasn't carried out. I want to cut that with it. But if you wanted to cut a cabbage that you thought was cut out, was detached from the ground, and it turned out that it was attached, your machshava happened here. You cut exactly what you wanted to cut, but you're a misasik because you thought you were doing something else, and it turned out to be that it was this, that it was misasik. Actually, that's not Rashi's traces. Rashi holds that if you wanted to cut the cabbage and you carried out your machshava exactly, then you're taka shegi, bring a carbon. So Rashi learns like this. Melech Masheva says you wanted to cut a cabbage that you thought was attached, and you ended up cutting another cabbage altogether. That's Melech's machshavas. Your machshava wasn't carried out because everything was wrong. It was detached. It was the wrong one. If you wanted to cut this, you ended up cutting that. That's misasik. If you wanted to cut this cabbage, but you thought it was detached, it turned out to be attached. That's a shayik. That's a shagig already, because everything you want to do happened, just the mitzvah is a little bit different. That's a shagig. Teisha says, no, that's misasik. That's misasik, because you want to detach and it came out attached. But shagig is that you didn't know there was a Shabbos, you didn't know, there was an Aveda, that kind of shagig. Anyway, so that's what we use ba. Ba, you have to know what you're doing in order to be chayiv in Hilchos Shabbos. Okay, just quickly finish the Gemara. And Rabbi Yechon said, there's nothing different. Who says the machlek is Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Lezer? They're just learning different ways. The Rab Sheish is machli, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Lezer. You find sometimes Rab Sheish quotes Rabbi Lezer as if this is Rabbi Kiva, Lezer, because it makes absolutely no difference. Which is interesting because the Magen Ram writes a similar kuf in the laws. You have to be very careful of the names that you attribute. And here it seems that you don't. So others want to say Magen Ram is only talking about if it's nafkamina, it's teaching you halacha that someone else disagrees with. But it seems from here, yeah. But here that. The names don't matter. Yet so many times the Gemara is so pedantic. They want to know exactly who said what. Yeah. But yesterday we had two names, the right names, but the machlek in the two gesoys was who was first and who was second. That to that extent. And here we come along and say, yeah, sometimes this, sometimes that. Anyway, only when there's an argument, maybe we really need to know the names. Have a good day, tomorrow. Have a good day. See you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.